An unexpected storm, a missing dog and a journey of 1,000 miles that brought strangers together for a common goal, to bring Buddy back home. Get ready for a heartwarming story of courage, loyalty, and the strength of bonds that connect hearts, even at a distance. Will Buddy find his way back? Discover how the power of love and music transformed lives and inspired a nation. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of Pine Grove National Forest, casting dappled shadows on the Harper family's campsite. 12-year-old Emily sat cross-legged outside her tent, her Australian Shepherd Buddy's head resting contentedly in her lap. Her fingers traced the familiar patterns in his blue merle coat, the same rhythmic motion that had calmed them both since the day she first held him as a tiny puppy 3 years ago. "Ready for our big hike, boy?" Emily scratched behind his ears, earning an enthusiastic tail wag. Buddy's heterochromatic eyes, one crystal blue, one warm brown, gazed up at her with unwavering devotion. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of adventure, mingling with the aroma of her father Robert's famous camping pancakes sizzling on the portable stove. Her mother Linda was marking their planned route on a trail map, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Remember, sweetie," Linda called out, "stay close during the hike. The ranger said these trails can get tricky, especially after last week's storm." Emily nodded, though her attention remained fixed on Buddy. She'd spent weeks planning this vacation, marking all the spots where they could take the best photos together. Her Instagram was filled with their adventures, Buddy helping her with homework, joining her for backyard stargazing, and even wearing matching Halloween costumes. The family set out after breakfast, with Buddy leading the way, his nose working overtime to process the symphony of forest scents. Emily kept him on a loose leash, trusting his natural herding instincts to stay close. The trail wound through towering pines, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of the valley below. "Look, Buddy." Emily pointed to a family of deer grazing in a distant meadow. Buddy's ears perked up, but he remained steady beside her, showing the discipline that had made him the star of puppy training class. The trouble began 3 hours into their hike. The path narrowed as it hugged the edge of a steep ravine, forcing them to walk single file. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind picked up, carrying the first hints of rain. "Maybe we should head back," Robert suggested, eyeing the threatening sky. Before anyone could respond, a deafening crack of thunder split the air. Buddy, typically unfazed by storms, startled at the sound amplified by the ravine. He jerked backward, pulling the leash from Emily's surprised grip. "Buddy, no." Emily's cry was lost in another thunderclap as Buddy bolted into the underbrush, his blue merle coat disappearing among the shadows of the forest. The next hours became a blur of desperate searching. The Harpers called until their voices grew hoarse, trudging through the intensifying storm. Park rangers joined the search, their flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness, but the dense forest and driving rain made tracking nearly impossible. "He's microchipped," Linda reminded them, her voice tight with worry. "Someone will find him." But as night fell and the storm showed no signs of letting up, the rangers advised the family to return to their campsite. Emily refused at first, her shoes caked with mud, her clothes soaked through. "He's out there alone," she sobbed into her father's jacket. "He must be so scared." "We'll keep searching," the lead ranger assured them. "But right now, it's too dangerous for you to stay out here." Back at the campsite, Emily sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness beyond their lantern's glow. She clutched Buddy's favorite tennis ball, still carrying the teeth marks from countless games of fetch. "He'll find his way back," she whispered, more to herself than to her parents. "He's the smartest dog in the world." But as dawn broke and another day of searching yielded no sign of Buddy, reality began to sink in. They were nearly 1,000 miles from home, and their vacation time was running out. "We have to go home, sweetie," Linda said gently, holding her daughter close. "The rangers have our contact information. They'll call the moment they find anything." Emily felt as though her heart was being torn in two. How could they leave without him? Buddy was more than just a pet, he was her best friend, her confidant, her protector. The thought of him alone in this vast wilderness made her physically ill. As they packed up their campsite, Emily left Buddy's ball and her sweatshirt near where they'd last seen him, hoping their familiar scents might guide him back. She took one last photo of the forest with her phone, trying to memorize every detail of the landscape. "I'll find you," she promised silently, watching the trees recede in the rearview mirror. "Whatever it takes, I'll bring you home." Miles away, deep in the forest, Buddy huddled beneath a fallen log, his coat matted with mud and leaves. The storm had disoriented him, the thunder masking the familiar sounds of Emily's voice. But as the rain finally began to ease, he emerged from his shelter, nose lifted to the wind. Somewhere, far beyond these trees, was home. And though he didn't know exactly how, he would find his way back to the girl who had given him his family. The journey ahead would test every ounce of his intelligence, strength, and devotion. But for Emily, Buddy would cross 1,000 forests, climb 1,000 mountains. Their story was far from over, it was just beginning. Dawn broke over Pine Grove National Forest, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Buddy emerged from his makeshift shelter, shaking off the morning dew that had settled on his coat. The storm had passed, but it had left the forest transformed, familiar scents washed away, landmarks altered by fallen branches and mud slides. His stomach growled, reminding him of the breakfast he should have been sharing with Emily. The thought of her sent a wave of determination through his tired body. In 3 years, he had never spent a night away from her. Even when she had her tonsils removed and spent 2 days in the hospital, he had waited faithfully by her bedroom door until she returned. Using his herding instincts, Buddy began to retrace their steps from the previous day. The rain had obscured most of the trail, but he remembered the distinctive scent of pine sap from a fallen tree they had passed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the Harper family's SUV pulled into their driveway in Boulder, Colorado. The 1,000-mile journey home had been the longest of Emily's life. Every time they had passed a blue merle Australian shepherd on the highway, her heart had leaped, only to crash again when it wasn't Buddy. "Home sweet home," Robert said softly, but the words felt hollow. Emily stared at their front door, dreading the moment she would have to walk inside and face Buddy's empty bed in the corner of her room, his food bowl in the kitchen, the rope toy still lying in the backyard where they'd last played tug-of-war. Linda touched her daughter's shoulder. "Why don't you go up to your room and rest? You barely slept on the drive." But Emily couldn't rest. As soon as she entered her room, she pulled out her laptop and began researching. How far can dogs travel in a day? How do they navigate long distances? Success stories of dogs finding their way home. She created a document titled Operation Bring Buddy Home and started making lists. Back in the forest, Buddy had made his way to a small stream. His training kicked in, Emily had taught him to drink only from running water during their hiking trips. As he lapped at the cool water, movement caught his eye. A young deer watched him cautiously from across the stream. Under normal circumstances, Buddy's herding instinct might have urged him to chase it, but hunger had become a more pressing concern. He remembered the camping tricks Robert had taught Emily, following water downstream usually led to civilization. The stream became his guide as he navigated through the dense undergrowth. His paw pads, though tough from countless hikes, were already getting tender from the rough terrain. Still, he pressed on, his dual-colored eyes alert for any signs of danger, or home. In her room, Emily had pinned a large map to her wall, marking Pine Grove National Forest with a red X. She drew a circle indicating the possible distance Buddy could have traveled in a day, based on her research. The radius was discouragingly large. "Emily." Linda knocked gently on the door. Mrs. Chen from next door brought over some dinner. "I'm not hungry," Emily replied, but her mother entered anyway, carrying a plate of dumplings. Linda's eyes fell on the map and the scattered papers covered in Emily's neat handwriting. "Oh, sweetheart. I've been thinking," Emily said quickly, pointing to her laptop screen. There are all these missing pet websites and Facebook groups. We can post Buddy's information everywhere. And look, some people have had success using drones to search large areas. Linda sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. Emily joined her reluctantly, knowing what was coming, the well-meaning but painful attempt at comfort. But instead, Linda picked up one of Emily's papers and studied it. "Tell me more about these Facebook groups. Maybe we can start posting tonight." Emily's eyes welled with tears as she hugged her mother. "You don't think I'm being silly?" "Silly? No, honey. You're being persistent. And persistence is exactly what Buddy needs right now." As the sun began to set, Buddy found himself in an unfamiliar valley. The stream had led him to a wider river, its waters too swift and deep to cross safely. He would need to find another way around, but that would mean losing his only reliable landmark. A distant howl made his ears prick up. Wolves. His years of comfortable family life hadn't completely erased his instincts. He knew he needed to find shelter for the night. A hollow beneath a large oak tree caught his attention. It wasn't as comfortable as his bed at home, but it would have to do. As he curled up in the hollow, thunder rumbled again in the distance. Buddy's heart rate quickened, remembering how the last storm had separated him from Emily. But this time, the thunder helped orient him. Home was east of the mountains, where summer storms always rolled in from. Tomorrow, he would use that knowledge to guide his journey. That night, both Emily and Buddy fell asleep to the sound of distant thunder. In her room, Emily clutched Buddy's favorite plush toy, her laptop still open to a page about lost dog recovery. In his tree hollow, Buddy dreamed of Emily's laugh, the sound that had always meant home, safety, and love. Neither knew exactly how their reunion would happen, but both held on to the same unshakable truth: somewhere out there, the other one was looking for them. And in that shared determination, 1,000 miles began to feel just a little bit shorter. The river had swollen overnight, its waters brown and angry from the recent storms. Buddy stood at its edge, watching debris race past in the current. His instincts told him crossing here would be fatal, but the river stretched endlessly in both directions, an impossible barrier between him and home. A crack of breaking wood echoed across the water as a fallen tree tumbled downstream, its branches reaching like desperate fingers toward the sky. Buddy tracked its movement, his herding instinct automatically calculating trajectories. Then he saw it, about 50 yards upstream, a massive oak had fallen across the river, creating a natural bridge. The trunk was slick with rain and moss, but Buddy's nimble paws were made for precarious surfaces. He'd spent countless hours practicing agility courses with Emily in their backyard, balancing on wooden planks and weaving through poles. This would be just another challenge, albeit with much higher stakes. Meanwhile, in Boulder, Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by freshly printed "Lost Dog" posters. Her father had helped her design them the night before, making sure to include multiple clear photos of Buddy's distinctive face and coat pattern. "We'll start with local businesses," Robert explained, sorting the posters into stacks. "Then branch out to neighboring towns. Someone might have spotted him if he's trying to make his way back." Emily nodded, adding another pushpin to her map. She'd been tracking weather patterns between Pine Grove and Boulder, trying to guess which route Buddy might take. The local meteorologist's blog had become her most visited website. "Dad," she asked, studying the map. "Do you think he knows which way is home?" Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. "Buddy's not just any dog, Em. Remember when he found his way back to the car that time we got separated on the Crystal Lake Trail? He's got something special, call it instinct, intelligence, or love. Maybe all three." Back at the river, Buddy had begun his careful journey across the fallen oak. Each step was a calculated risk, his claws seeking purchase in the wet bark. Halfway across, a surge of water slammed more debris into the trunk, making it shudder. Buddy froze, his muscles tense, waiting for the vibrations to stop. A memory flashed through his mind, Emily teaching him to stay on the wobbling balance board, her voice steady and encouraging. "You've got this, buddy boy," she'd say, holding out a treat. "Just a little longer." Drawing on that training, Buddy held his position until the trunk stabilized, then continued his methodical progress. When his paws finally touched the opposite bank, he shook himself vigorously, as if casting off the fear of the crossing. The new side of the river presented fresh challenges. The underbrush was thicker here, thorny vines catching in his fur. His stomach cramped with hunger, it had been almost 2 days since his last real meal. He needed to hunt, something he'd never had to do before. Movement in the brush caught his attention, a rabbit, unaware of his presence. Buddy's muscles coiled instinctively. He'd never harmed another animal, his herding instinct always channeled into play. But survival meant adapting. The chase was brief but effective. Years of fetch and agility training had honed his speed and coordination. Minutes later, he had his first wild meal. It wasn't kibble topped with Emily's occasional table scraps, but it would keep him going. In Boulder, Emily and her parents had split up to cover more ground with the posters. She'd insisted on taking the bike path that ran through town, it was her favorite place to walk Buddy, and somehow being there made her feel closer to him. The local coffee shop owner, Ms. Rodriguez, was especially sympathetic. "My cousin works at a radio station," she said, taking extra posters. "I'll ask her to mention it on her morning show." "Does Buddy respond to any specific sounds or calls?" Emily's face lit up. "He comes running whenever I play my violin. He howls along with it, especially to Bach's Minuet in G. Mom says he thinks he's singing." "That's perfect, something distinctive that people can listen for. Write down the song title for me." As Emily left the coffee shop, her phone buzzed. Linda had created a Facebook page for Buddy, and it was already gaining traction. People were sharing stories of their own dogs finding their way home from incredible distances. One comment caught her eye: "Dogs can smell their way home from miles away if the wind conditions are right. Their sense of direction is amazing. My German Shepherd found his way home from 2 states away." Emily immediately opened her weather app, checking wind patterns. The prevailing winds were from the west, exactly the direction Buddy needed to travel. For the first time in days, she felt a genuine smile spread across her face. The afternoon sun was starting to dip when Buddy found the abandoned barn. Its wooden walls were weathered and gaps in the roof let in streams of light, but it offered shelter from the wind that had been picking up. More importantly, it smelled of old hay and mice, the promise of an easier dinner than the rabbit. As he settled into a corner of the barn, Buddy's ears pricked up at a familiar sound carried on the wind, someone playing violin in the distance. For a moment, his heart leaped, but this wasn't Emily's playing. The notes were different, missing her distinctive style. Still, the music sparked something in him. He remembered the hours spent lying under Emily's music stand, watching her practice, adding his voice to her melodies. Home wasn't just a place, it was Emily's violin, her laughter when he howled along, the way she'd reward him with belly rubs after every performance. That night, as stars appeared through the gaps in the barn roof, Buddy dreamed of music. In Boulder, Emily fell asleep at her desk, her violin beside her, sheets of Bach's Minuet in G scattered across her homework. The distance between them was still vast, but each in their own way had found a small victory today. Buddy had conquered the river and found shelter. Emily had spread their story further than she'd thought possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, hope was enough. The barn's rusty hinges creaked in the pre-dawn breeze, rousing Buddy from his fitful sleep. Something had changed. His nose twitched, picking up an unfamiliar scent, musky and predatory. Wolves. His muscles tensed as he registered multiple sets of paw steps circling the barn. 3 days in the wild had sharpened his instincts. The comfortable family pet was adapting, learning to read the subtle warnings in wind shifts and shadow movements. He knew the wolves had likely tracked the scent of his rabbit kill from the previous day. A low growl resonated from the barn's main entrance. In the dim light, Buddy made out the silhouette of a large gray wolf, its amber eyes fixed on him. Two more shadows moved into position, blocking other potential escape routes. They were hunting as a pack, using strategy that Buddy's own herding instincts helped him recognize. In Boulder, Emily's alarm chirped at 5:30 a.m. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night responding to comments on Buddy's Facebook page. The post had gone viral overnight, shared by pet rescue networks across 3 states. Her mother had helped her set up an email address specifically for Buddy sightings, bring Buddy home at email.com. You need to get ready for school, Linda reminded her gently, placing a bowl of oatmeal on her desk. Emily stared at her breakfast, her stomach in knots. Mom, I can't just go to school like everything's normal. What if someone spots him and we miss the message? That's why we set up email notifications on both our phones, Linda assured her. And your father took the day off to follow up on some promising leads. One of them is from a ranger station just outside Pine Grove. Back in the barn, Buddy's mind raced through his options. The wolves were larger and stronger, but he had advantages they didn't know about. Years of agility training had made him exceptionally quick and nimble. The barn's interior was a maze of old farming equipment and fallen beams, perfect for a smaller, more agile dog. The lead wolf lunged first. Buddy ducked under a rusty tractor, emerging on the other side before the wolf could change direction. The second wolf tried to cut him off, but Buddy leaped onto a hay bale, using it as a springboard to reach a broken section of the loft. Emily's first class of the day was science, normally one of her favorites. Today, though, she couldn't focus on Ms. Wesley's lesson about animal migration patterns. Until something the teacher said caught her attention. Animals have remarkable navigation abilities, Ms. Wesley explained. They can use everything from star positions to magnetic fields to find their way across vast distances. Emily's hand shot up. Can dogs do that? Use magnetic fields and stars? Ms. Wesley smiled, recognizing the personal stake in Emily's question. The whole school knew about Buddy by now. Actually, there's fascinating research about dogs' navigational abilities. They can detect Earth's magnetic field, and they're incredibly sensitive to scent markers. Some scientists believe they create mental maps of familiar scents to navigate. During lunch break, Emily shared this information on Buddy's Facebook page. Comments poured in from dog experts and scientists, offering more detailed explanations of canine navigation. One post particularly caught her eye: Australian Shepherds were bred to work independently and problem solve. They're one of the most intelligent breeds for long-distance navigation. In the barn loft, Buddy had gained crucial moments to catch his breath. The wolves circled below, frustrated by his unexpected maneuver. His position gave him a clear view of the barn's rear wall, where weather and time had created a large gap between the boards. It would be a tight squeeze, but Buddy's agile frame could make it. The real question was what waited on the other side. He had no choice but to find out as the lead wolf began climbing the unstable hay bales. Buddy timed his move perfectly. As the wolf reached the loft, he sprinted across the wooden beam and slipped through the gap. He landed in a thorny bush, the sharp branches scratching his coat but breaking his fall. Without looking back, he ran. The wolves gave chase, but Buddy had another advantage: stamina bred into his herding dog lineage. Hour after hour, he maintained a steady pace, using the rising sun to keep running east. Eventually, the wolves' howls faded into the distance. That afternoon, Emily received an unexpected visitor at school. Mr. Phillips, her orchestra teacher, had heard about Buddy's connection to violin music. "I have an idea," he said, holding up sheet music for Bach's Minuet in G. "What if we record you playing Buddy's favorite song? We could share it on social media, ask people to play it if they spot a dog matching his description." For the first time in days, Emily felt truly excited. Could the whole orchestra help? The sound would carry further with more instruments. Better yet, Mr. Phillips grinned, I know some local radio DJs. We could ask them to play it during their broadcasts. By sunset, Buddy had found a new shelter, a shallow cave near a small stream. His muscles ached from the long run, but his close call with the wolves had taught him valuable lessons. He was becoming stronger, smarter, more attuned to his surroundings. As he lapped at the cool stream water, a distant sound made his ears perk up. Carried on the evening breeze was the faint melody of classical music, someone's car radio playing in the distance. It wasn't Emily's violin, but it strengthened his resolve. Somewhere ahead was civilization, and beyond that, home. In her bedroom that night, Emily recorded herself playing Bach's Minuet in G, her violin singing with all the love and longing in her heart. As she uploaded the recording to Buddy's Facebook page, she whispered to his photo on her desk, "Follow the music home, boy. Just follow the music home." Joe Martinez had been driving trucks for 23 years, and he'd seen just about everything on America's highways. But something about the Blue Merle Australian Shepherd trotting along Route 40's shoulder made him ease off the accelerator of his 18-wheeler. The dog moved with purpose, head high, each step deliberate despite obvious exhaustion. This wasn't some random stray, this dog was going somewhere. Joe had spent enough time on the road to recognize a fellow traveler. He pulled his rig onto the shoulder, careful to leave plenty of space between his truck and the dog. The CB radio crackled with routine chatter as he reached for the sandwich he'd bought at his last stop. His own dog, an elderly golden retriever named Max, had passed away 6 months ago. The cab felt emptier without him. "Hey there, Buddy," Joe called softly, breaking off a piece of turkey sandwich. The dog stopped, dual-colored eyes assessing him with remarkable intelligence. "You look like you could use a friend." Meanwhile, in Boulder, Emily's violin recording had taken on a life of its own. Local radio stations had picked up the story, and Mr. Phillips had helped organize an impromptu orchestra performance in the park. Music students from 3 different schools had shown up to play Bach's Minuet in G, their combined melody carrying across the city. "The idea's trending on Twitter," Linda announced, showing Emily her phone. #Buddy's concert was being shared by classical music stations across the country. People are organizing similar performances in their own communities. Emily watched the videos pouring in, violin students in Kansas, a string quartet in Wyoming, even a full orchestra in Salt Lake City, all playing Buddy's favorite song. Each performance was a beacon of hope, a musical lighthouse guiding him home. Back on Route 40, Buddy cautiously approached the truck driver. 5 days in the wild had taught him to be wary, but something about this human felt safe. The man's voice was gentle, and he sat patiently on his truck steps, not trying to grab or chase. The sandwich smelled incredible. After days of rabbits and mice, the scent of turkey and bread made Buddy's mouth water. He accepted the offered food carefully, maintaining a safe distance as he ate. "You're a long way from anywhere," Joe mused, noting the dog's muddy but well-groomed coat and trim nails. "Somebody's missing you something fierce, I bet." Buddy's ears perked up at movement in the tree line. A coyote watched from the shadows, waiting to see if this larger dog would share its food. But the wild animal's presence made Buddy realize something. He'd been following the highway east all morning, and not a single coyote had approached until now. The truck traffic must have been keeping predators away. In Boulder, Emily sat at her desk, doing her homework while local news played on her laptop. A reporter was interviewing a wildlife expert about lost dogs. "They often follow major roads," the expert explained. "Not only do highways generally lead to populated areas, but the regular traffic tends to deter predators. It's a naturally safer route for a traveling animal." Emily grabbed her map, tracing the major highways between Pine Grove and Boulder. Route 40 cut a nearly straight line east. Could Buddy have found it? She quickly added this information to his Facebook page, asking followers to pay special attention to highways and truck stops. Joe watched as the dog finished the sandwich, noting how it kept glancing eastward. "Heading that way, are you?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling through recent news. Wait a minute. There it was, a shared post about a missing Australian shepherd, last seen in Pine Grove National Forest. The photo showed the same distinctive coat pattern, the same unique eyes. The post mentioned the dog responded to violin music, particularly Bach's Minuet in G. Joe smiled, remembering the classical music CD his wife had insisted he keep in the truck. "How about some traveling music?" he asked, reaching into the cab to start the CD player. The first notes of Bach filled the air. Buddy's reaction was immediate, his ears shot up, and he took a step toward the truck. Joe's heart swelled. This had to be the missing dog from the post. "Tell you what," Joe said, patting the passenger seat. "I'm headed east for the next 300 miles. Better than walking, if you trust me enough to hop in." Buddy studied the open truck door. The music continued playing, reminding him of afternoons spent under Emily's music stand. This human felt right, and the thought of getting off his aching paws was tempting. After a moment's consideration, he jumped into the cab. "That's a good boy," Joe grinned, closing the door. "Let's get you a little closer to home." As the truck merged back onto the highway, Joe called the number from the Facebook post. It went to voicemail. Emily was still in her last class of the day. "Hello," he said after the beep. "My name's Joe Martinez. I think I just picked up your dog on Route 40, about 50 miles east of Pine Grove." He responded to the classical music just like you said. "I'm driving east in a blue Peterbilt truck. We'll stop at the Flying J truck stop in Grand Junction around 7 tonight, if you can meet us there." In her classroom, Emily's phone silently logged the voicemail. Above the highway, the afternoon sun shone on Buddy's face as he watched the world speed by, Bach's familiar notes surrounding him like an old friend. Joe glanced at his passenger, who sat with the same alertness he'd shown on the road. "You've got quite a story to tell, don't you, boy?" "Well, don't worry. We truckers look out for each other, and today that includes you." For the first time in days, Buddy felt his muscles truly relax. The rhythm of the engine combined with the music created a soothing symphony, and he allowed himself to doze, knowing each mile brought him closer to Emily. The Flying J truck stop blazed like a small city against the darkening sky. Joe guided his Peterbilt into the sprawling lot, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. 7:15 p.m. He'd hoped the Harper family would be waiting, but the only people in sight were fellow truckers fueling up for the night shift. Buddy sat up straighter in the passenger seat, nose pressed against the window. After nearly 4 hours of highway travel, he'd covered more ground than he could have managed in days of walking. But something about this place felt wrong, it wasn't home yet. "Let me check my phone again," Joe muttered, pulling into a parking spot. No return call. He'd left 3 more messages since his first attempt, each one more detailed than the last. Maybe they haven't checked their voicemail. In Boulder, Emily was finally listening to her phone messages, all 27 of them. News of Buddy's Facebook page had spread faster than anyone expected, and people were calling from all over the western states with potential sightings. Her heart raced as she played each one, but her excitement dimmed with every mistaken identity and false lead. Then she reached the 4th message. A warm, gravelly voice filled her room. "Hello, my name's Joe Martinez. I think I just picked up your dog on Route 40. Mom!" Emily screamed, nearly dropping her phone. "Mom. Someone found Buddy." She played the message on speaker as her parents rushed in. Their faces fell as they realized the timestamp. The message was over 3 hours old. The truck stop meeting time had come and gone. "Call him back," Robert urged. "Right now." But Joe's phone went straight to voicemail. In areas with spotty coverage, many truckers turned off their phones to save battery life. Emily left a desperate message: "Mr. Martinez, this is Emily Harper. We just got your messages about Buddy. Please call us back. We can meet you anywhere." At the truck stop, Joe had taken Buddy for a brief walk around the parking lot, keeping him close on a makeshift leash fashioned from a spare bit of rope. The dog was clearly restless, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. "I know, boy," Joe sighed. "This isn't quite the reunion we hoped for." A memory flickered through his mind, the day he'd had to put Max down. His wife had been out of town, and he'd faced that heartbreaking decision alone. He'd give anything now to have one more day with his old friend. Making a decision, Joe pulled out his road atlas. His delivery schedule showed a drop-off in Denver tomorrow afternoon, less than an hour from Boulder. It would mean driving through the night, but he'd done that plenty of times before. "What do you say we change plans?" he asked Buddy, who tilted his head at the question. "Your family's probably worried sick. Might as well get you all the way home." Back in Boulder, Emily refused to go to bed. She'd set up a command center at the kitchen table, laptop open to Buddy's Facebook page, phone charging nearby, maps spread out everywhere. Her mother brought her hot chocolate and settled in beside her. "The post about Mr. Martinez has over 5,000 shares now," Emily said, refreshing the page again. "Someone must know him. Look, trucking companies are sharing it in their employee groups." Linda squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "Why don't you play your violin for a bit? It always helps you think." Emily nodded, retrieving her instrument. As she began the familiar notes of Bach's Minuet in G, she noticed something on one of the maps, a direct route from Grand Junction to Boulder that passed right through Denver. "Mom, what if Mr. Martinez is a long-haul trucker? The Flying J is a major truck stop on the Denver route. Could he be heading this way?" On the highway, Buddy dozed fitfully in the passenger seat. The truck's movement reminded him of car rides with the Harpers, but the scents and sounds were all wrong. Through the windshield, he watched the moon rise over distant mountains. Joe kept the classical music playing softly, more for Buddy's comfort than his own. His regular route had taken him through Boulder dozens of times, but he'd never paid much attention to the city before. Tomorrow would be different. "Got your own personal chauffeur now," he chuckled, reaching over to pat Buddy's head. "First-class service all the way home." The dog leaned into his touch, and Joe felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd forgotten how much he missed having a companion in the cab. Maybe after this adventure, it was time to visit the local shelter back home. Emily's violin music drifted through her open bedroom window, floating out over the sleeping streets of Boulder. She played with renewed purpose, imagining each note traveling across the dark miles between her and Buddy. In the truck, Buddy's ears suddenly pricked up. The CD had changed tracks to a different piece, but for a moment, carried on the night wind, he could have sworn he heard Emily's distinct way of playing those familiar notes. Joe noticed the dog's reaction. "Getting closer," he said softly. "Getting closer every mile." Through the long night hours, 2 separate vigils continued. In his truck, Joe drove steadily eastward, keeping one eye on his fuel gauge and the other on his precious cargo. In Boulder, Emily played her violin until her fingers ached, each note a beacon calling Buddy home. The night was a crossroads, not the one they'd hoped for at the truck stop, but one that would prove just as important. Sometimes missed connections led to even better opportunities. And sometimes, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, the longest journeys finally began to feel like they were nearing their end. The mountain highway twisted through the darkness like a black river, its edges marked by the rhythmic flash of reflectors. Joe fought fatigue as he guided his truck around another bend, his eyes burning from hours of focus. The coffee from his last stop had worn off, but he couldn't bring himself to pull over, not when they were getting so close. Buddy sat alert in the passenger seat, as if sensing Joe's struggle. Every so often, he would press his nose against the window, tracking scents that only he could detect. The classical music had long since ended, replaced by the steady hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. Unit 47, be advised, a disembodied voice warned through the static. Rockslide reported ahead on Route 70, near mile marker 213. Highway patrol en route. Expect delays. Joe checked his GPS. The rockslide was directly in their path, with no viable alternate routes that wouldn't add hours to their journey. He glanced at Buddy. "What do you think, boy? Should we try our luck?" In Boulder, Emily paced her room, too wired to sleep. Her violin lay silent on her bed. She'd played until her mother had gently insisted she take a break. The Facebook post about Joe had grown to over 10,000 shares, spawning dozens of trucker forums and chat groups dedicated to finding him. "Emily." Robert knocked softly before entering. "I think I found something." A trucker in Grand Junction remembers seeing a blue Peterbilt with a dog matching Buddy's description. He said the driver was heading east on Route 70. Emily's heart leaped. "That's got to be them. Dad, Denver is on Route 70. We have to go, now." "Honey, it's 2 in the morning, Linda called from the hallway. And we don't even know for sure if that's where they're headed. But what if it is? What if we miss them again?" Back on the highway, Joe's headlights illuminated an ominous scene. Large boulders and smaller rocks scattered across both lanes, forcing a line of vehicles to inch carefully around the obstacle using the narrow shoulder. Highway patrol officers directed traffic with flashlights, their faces grim. "Going to be at least an hour delay," an officer informed Joe as he approached. "Maybe more before the heavy equipment arrives to clear this mess." Joe drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, considering their options. They could wait it out, but his delivery schedule was already tight. More importantly, every hour they delayed was another hour the Harper family spent worrying about their dog. That's when he noticed Buddy's behavior had changed. The dog stood rigid in his seat, staring intently at something through the passenger window. Following his gaze, Joe spotted a service road, barely more than a dirt track, branching off from the highway. "What do you see, boy?" Joe wondered aloud. He pulled out his atlas again, squinting at the fine print. The service road wasn't marked, but if his geography was right, it might connect with Route 40 further east. It would be a rough ride for his truck, but... In Boulder, Emily had won the argument. The Harpers were piling into their car, thermoses of coffee and energy drinks packed for the drive to Denver. Robert had called in to take another day off work, and Linda had already contacted Emily's school. "We'll start at the major truck stops," Robert planned as they drove. Someone must have seen them. Emily clutched her phone, refreshing the Facebook page constantly. A new comment caught her eye, a warning about a rockslide on Route 70. Her stomach clenched. What if Buddy and Joe were stuck there? On the service road, Joe navigated carefully around potholes and ruts, grateful for his years of experience handling difficult terrain. Buddy seemed more relaxed now, as if approving of their alternate route. The dog's instincts had been right about the road, it was rough but passable. "You know something about finding the right path, don't you?" Joe smiled, remembering how deliberately Buddy had been traveling when they first met. "Guess that's what you've been doing this whole time." The truck's headlights caught movement ahead, a small herd of deer crossing the road. Joe slowed to a stop, not wanting to startle them. As they waited, he noticed Buddy wasn't agitated by the deer. Instead, the dog watched them with what seemed like recognition. Unknown to Joe, these were similar to the deer Buddy had encountered during his first days in the wild. But he was a different dog now, no longer afraid, no longer alone. He had learned to read the wilderness, to understand its rhythms and residents. More importantly, he had learned to trust his instincts about which humans could help him get home. Dawn was approaching as the service road finally merged back onto the highway, well past the rockslide. Joe checked his fuel gauge, they'd used more gas on the rough terrain, and he'd need to stop soon. But the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in shades of hope. In their car, the Harpers watched the same sunrise. Emily had finally dozed off in the back seat, her phone still clutched in her hand. Linda reached back to gently take it, noticing a new message notification. "Robert," she whispered urgently. "A gas station attendant just posted. He swears he saw a blue truck with an Australian Shepherd headed toward Denver on Route 40. They stopped for fuel less than an hour ago." Emily stirred at her mother's words, instantly alert. "How far are we from Route 40? "It intersects with our road just outside Denver," Robert replied, already adjusting their route. "If we hurry, we might be able to catch them." The rising sun painted the highway in shades of gold and promise. In his truck, Joe felt his fatigue lifting as Denver's skyline appeared on the horizon. In the Harpers' car, Emily pressed her forehead against the window, searching every truck they passed. They were all heading toward the same point, drawn together by love, determination, and the unshakable bond between a girl and her dog. The night roads had tested them, but dawn was breaking, and with it came the possibility of reunion. The first warning sign came as Joe merged onto Denver's busy I-25. A subtle shudder ran through his truck's engine, followed by an unfamiliar rattling sound. The rough service road had taken its toll, though he wouldn't realize how much for another few miles. Morning rush hour was in full swing, waves of commuter traffic flowing around his Peterbilt like a river around a boulder. Buddy stood alert in the passenger seat, his nose twitching at the increasing smell of exhaust and hot metal coming from the engine. "Just hold together a little longer, old girl," Joe muttered to his truck, patting the dashboard. The temperature gauge was creeping higher than he liked, and the rattling had grown more pronounced. The service road's punishment, combined with the night's long drive, had pushed the aging vehicle to its limits. Across town, the Harpers were caught in the same traffic surge. Emily had convinced her father to tune the car radio to the classical music station, just in case Buddy might hear it. They'd been monitoring every blue truck they passed, but none matched Joe's Peterbilt. "There's another post about them," Linda reported, scrolling through her phone. "A waitress at the Pine Bluff Diner says she served coffee to a trucker with an Australian Shepherd about an hour ago. She's certain it was them. She says the dog howled along when classical music played on the diner's radio." Emily leaned forward eagerly. "Which direction were they heading?" "Into Denver. She says the trucker mentioned something about a delivery deadline." The traffic inched forward as Robert navigated toward the industrial district, where most trucking companies had their delivery depots. If he has a deadline, that's where he'll be headed. In his truck, Joe was now seriously worried. The engine temperature had moved from concerning to alarming, and white smoke had started wisping from under the hood. He needed to pull over, but the morning traffic had him boxed in. Buddy sensed the change in the truck's rhythm and Joe's growing tension. He whined softly, pressing closer to the driver's side. Through the windshield, he could see tall buildings rising against the morning sky, buildings that looked more like the ones near home. "Sorry, boy," Joe said, finally spotting an exit ramp. "We need to make a quick stop before we blow the engine completely." The truck limped onto a side street lined with warehouses and repair shops. Joe had barely pulled into an empty lot before the engine made a sound like metal grinding on metal, followed by an ominous hiss of steam. "Well, that's not good." Joe killed the engine and reached for his phone. Dead, he'd forgotten to charge it during the night's adventures. Even worse. Meanwhile, Emily had convinced her parents to split up and cover more ground. Robert dropped them at a busy truck stop while he continued checking the delivery depots. Emily immediately headed for the restaurant, where her violin case drew curious looks from tired truckers. "Excuse me," she approached a group drinking coffee. "Have any of you seen a blue Peterbilt with an Australian Shepherd?" The driver's name is Joe Martinez. The truckers exchanged glances. "Joe Martinez. Yeah, I know Joe," one said. Usually drives the Denver-Salt Lake route. But I haven't seen him today. Wait, another trucker spoke up. I heard something on the CB about a Blue Pete pulling off I-25 with engine trouble. Near the warehouse district, I think. Emily's heart raced as she pulled out her phone to call her father. But at that moment, Buddy and Joe were facing their own crisis. Steam billowed from the truck's hood as Joe inspected the damage. The head gasket was blown, a major repair that would take hours at best. Worse, they were in an unfamiliar part of town with no easy way to contact the Harpers. Don't suppose you know how to fix engines? Joe asked Buddy, who sat watching him with those mismatched eyes. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his entire body tense with anticipation. He could smell something on the wind, something familiar. A few blocks away, Emily had convinced her mother to drive toward the warehouse district. She rolled down her window, playing her violin as they cruised slowly past repair shops and storage facilities. The notes of Bach's Minuet in G drifted through the morning air. In the empty lot, Buddy's reaction was immediate. He leaped up in the truck's cab, pawing at the window as his howl joined the distant violin music. Joe's eyes widened. Is that? But Buddy was already scratching at the door, more animated than Joe had seen him since they met. The dog's entire body trembled with recognition and longing. Okay, boy, Joe opened the door. Go find her. Buddy hit the ground running, his nose and ears guiding him toward the music he'd know anywhere. Joe jogged after him, his own exhaustion forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Emily continued playing as Linda drove, her fingers moving through the familiar notes automatically while her eyes scanned every lot and alley. Then, over her violin, she heard it, a distant howl that made her heart stop. Mom! Did you hear that? Linda was already turning the car around, following the sound. As they rounded a corner, they saw them, a blue truck billowing steam in an empty lot, and running toward them, a blur of blue merle fur. Emily dropped her violin back in its case and was out of the car before it fully stopped. Buddy! The dog's speed doubled at her voice, covering the last distance between them in joyful bounds. Their collision was a tangle of fur and tears and laughter, Buddy's whole body wiggling as he covered Emily's face with kisses. Joe watched from a distance, his own eyes misty. It didn't matter that his truck was broken down, that he'd missed his delivery deadline, that he'd driven through the night on a dangerous road. This moment made it all worthwhile. Linda approached him, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Martinez. I'm Linda Harper. We can never thank you enough. But Joe just smiled, watching as Buddy rolled on the ground with Emily, both of them oblivious to everything else in the world. Sometimes, he realized, a breakdown was really just another word for a miracle in disguise. Robert Harper arrived at the empty lot to find a scene he would never forget, Emily sitting on the ground, wrapped around Buddy as if she might never let go, while Linda talked animatedly with a tired-looking truck driver beside his steaming Peterbilt. The morning sun caught the tears on everyone's faces, turning them to gold. The cavalry's here, Linda called out as Robert parked. She turned back to Joe. Please, let us help with your truck. It's the least we can do. Joe shook his head, still watching Emily and Buddy with a gentle smile. Already called my company's repair service from Mrs. Harper's phone. They'll take care of it. He knelt down to scratch Buddy's ears one last time. Besides, getting this boy home was worth any trouble. Emily finally looked up, her face streaked with happy tears. Mr. Martinez, you have to come home with us. Mom makes the best pancakes, and Buddy loves pancakes, and you have to tell us everything about how you found him, and, breathe, sweetheart, Robert laughed, but his own voice was thick with emotion. He extended his hand to Joe. She's right, though. Please let us thank you properly. While they waited for the repair truck, Emily examined Buddy more closely. His normally pristine coat was matted in places, and he'd lost weight during his journey. There were small scars on his paw pads and a healing scratch above his right eye that made her think of his adventures in the wild. But his eyes, one blue, one brown, sparkled with the same love she remembered. "You're going to need a bath, mister," she told him, giggling as he responded by covering her face with more kisses. "And about 1,000,000 brushing sessions." Linda was already on the phone with their veterinarian, Dr. Chen. "Yes, we found him. Can you see him today? We want to make sure he's okay after everything he's been through." News of Buddy's reunion spread quickly through the networks that had formed around his story. Emily's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as her Facebook post was updated, "Buddy is home." The comment section exploded with joy and celebration from the thousands of people who had followed his journey. "Look at this," she showed Joe a video someone had posted of an impromptu Bach performance in a Denver park, celebrating Buddy's return. Similar celebrations were happening in towns along his route home, each community that had watched for him sharing in the joy of his safe return. The repair truck arrived as Robert was convincing Joe to follow them home in their car. "Your company says the truck will be ready by tonight," Robert explained. "Please, let us feed you and hear your story while you wait." Joe looked at Buddy, who had positioned himself between Emily and the car as if afraid they might be separated again. "Well, I suppose I could use some of those famous pancakes." At the Harper home, Buddy made a beeline for his water bowl, drinking deeply before flopping onto his bed in the corner of the kitchen. Emily sat beside him while Linda worked at the stove, the familiar scent of pancakes filling the air as Joe shared the story of finding Buddy on Route 40. He was walking with such purpose, Joe recalled, warming his hands around a coffee mug. Like he knew exactly where he was going. "I've never seen anything like it." "That's our Buddy," Emily beamed, running her fingers through his fur. "He's the smartest dog in the world." "He's certainly the most determined," Joe agreed. "And he had a lot of help along the way. Those people at the diner who recognized him from your posts, the radio stations playing his song." Linda set a stack of pancakes in front of Joe. "You were the real hero, though. Driving through the night, taking that service road." "I had my own reasons," Joe admitted, his voice softening. "Lost my old dog Max 6 months ago. Seeing Buddy out there, trying so hard to get home. I couldn't just drive by." Emily's eyes welled up again. She left Buddy's side to hug Joe fiercely. "Thank you for bringing him back to us." Outside, more neighbors were gathering as word spread through the community. Ms. Rodriguez from the coffee shop arrived with fresh pastries. Mr. Phillips, Emily's orchestra teacher, brought his violin. Dr. Chen made a house call rather than having them bring Buddy to the clinic. "He's dehydrated and has lost some weight," the vet reported after examining him. "Some minor cuts and bruises, and his paw pads are pretty worn. But overall, he's in remarkable shape for what he's been through. Just need to build him back up slowly." As the morning turned to afternoon, the Harpers' home became the center of an impromptu celebration. Buddy dozed contentedly on his bed, occasionally lifting his head to check that Emily was still nearby, or to accept gentle pets from Joe, who had become an honorary member of the family. Mr. Phillips organized an impromptu performance of Bach's Minuet in G on the front lawn, with Emily taking the lead. This time, Buddy's howling along was triumphant rather than lonely, a song of joy rather than longing. Joe watched it all with quiet satisfaction, thinking of Max and healing wounds both old and new. Sometimes, he realized, helping someone else find their way home could lead you to a kind of home yourself. As the sun climbed higher, Buddy's story continued to ripple outward through social media and news outlets, touching hearts and inspiring hope. But in the Harper's kitchen, surrounded by love and the scent of pancakes, none of that mattered. For Buddy and Emily, the only important thing was that their family was whole again, their bond stronger than ever, tested by distance but unbroken by trials. The first week after Buddy's return brought subtle changes to the Harper household. Emily noticed them in small moments, how Buddy now sat facing the front door during meals instead of under the table, the way his ears pricked at every unfamiliar sound, how he seemed more attuned to the wind and weather. Her once pampered pet had returned with an air of quiet confidence, a watchfulness born from his wilderness journey. "He's different," Emily confided to her mother one morning, watching Buddy patrol their backyard perimeter with newfound purpose. "Not in a bad way, just older, maybe. Wiser?" Linda nodded, understanding. "You're different too, sweetie. Adventures have a way of changing us." It was true. Emily had surprised herself during Buddy's absence, discovering reserves of determination and leadership she hadn't known she possessed. Her violin practice had taken on new intensity, each note played with the memory of how music had helped guide Buddy home. The story of Buddy's journey had captured hearts well beyond Boulder. Local news stations ran features about his remarkable return, focusing on how social media and community effort had helped reunite him with his family. Emily's Facebook page had transformed into a hub for other pet owners searching for their lost animals. "Look at this," she showed Buddy, scrolling through messages on her laptop. "A family in Wyoming found their lost cat because people learned to play music from our story. And here's another one from Utah." Buddy rested his head on her knee, his dual-colored eyes following her finger across the screen. Though the scars on his paw pads were healing, Dr. Chen had prescribed another week of rest before returning to their usual walks and play sessions. Emily filled the quiet recovery time by reading him stories of other reunited pets, as if sharing tales of hope could help heal his physical wounds. One afternoon, Joe's familiar blue Peterbilt rumbled down their street. He'd made a point of stopping by whenever his route brought him through Boulder, usually bearing treats for Buddy and stories from the road. This time, though, he wasn't alone. "This is Scout," he announced, helping a golden retriever puppy down from his truck. "The shelter had just gotten her in when I went to look. Something about those eyes reminded me of Max." Buddy approached the puppy with gentle curiosity, his tail wagging in welcome. Scout immediately tried to engage him in play, but seemed to sense his need for careful movement. Instead of roughhousing, she settled for lying beside him in the grass, both dogs content in each other's company. "He's teaching her already," Joe observed, watching as Buddy showed Scout how to respond to Emily's basic commands. "Guess he picked up some mentoring skills on his journey." Emily had been working on a special project, which she finally revealed to Joe that day, a hand-drawn map tracking Buddy's entire journey, marked with all the places he'd been spotted and the people who'd helped along the way. The margins were filled with newspaper clippings and printed photos from social media. "I thought you might want a copy," she said shyly, handing Joe a rolled-up duplicate. "To remember your part in his story." Joe studied the map with misty eyes, his finger tracing the route from Pine Grove to Boulder. "You know, I've driven these roads for 23 years, but they mean something different now. Every time I pass that service road or that truck stop, I think about him out there, trying to get home." The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Harper's lawn as Joe shared stories about Scout's first weeks on the road with him. The puppy had adapted quickly to truck life, already showing the same love of classical music that had helped him recognize Buddy. "She howls along just like he does," Joe laughed as Scout joined Buddy's harmonizing with Emily's violin practice. "Though she hasn't quite got his pitch." Looking at them, the veteran trucker and his new puppy, forever changed by a chance encounter with a lost dog, Emily understood what her mother meant about adventures changing people. Buddy's journey had transformed him from a family pet into something more, a survivor, a teacher, a symbol of hope for others searching for their way home. That night, as Boulder settled into twilight, Emily sat on her bedroom floor with Buddy, adding the final touches to her map. She'd started another project too, a journal recording not just Buddy's story, but all the stories of hope that had grown from it. Stories of communities coming together, of music bridging distances, of strangers becoming friends. "You know what, boy?" she scratched behind his ears, earning a contented sigh. "I think you did more than just find your way home. You helped other people find their way too." Buddy's response was to rest his chin on her knee, his eyes holding that new wisdom that seemed to say he understood exactly what she meant. Through the open window came the distant sound of a truck's horn, Scout's excited bark, and the evening wind carrying the promises of more adventures to come. But for now, they were exactly where they needed to be, together, changed by their journey but stronger for it, their bond deepened by the miles and memories between loss and reunion. Emily hugged Buddy close, breathing in the familiar scent of home. The autumn air carried a hint of winter as Emily and Buddy walked through Thompson Park, their first long walk since his return. Dr. Chen had finally given them clearance for extended outdoor activities, though Emily still watched carefully for any signs of fatigue. Buddy's physical wounds had healed, but some changes from his journey remained permanent, a slight limp after long exercise, a few silver scars in his blue merle coat, and most notably, a new awareness of his surroundings that made him an even more attentive companion. They passed the community bulletin board where, weeks ago, Emily had posted her first lost dog flyer. Now, the board hosted something different, a large map of Boulder County marked with colored pins, each representing a lost or found pet. Below it hung a sign-up sheet for volunteer search coordinators and a list of local musicians willing to help with audio searches, inspired by Buddy's response to violin music. "Look what you started," Emily told him, pausing to read some of the success stories posted alongside the map. Buddy sat at attention beside her, his dual-colored eyes scanning the park with the heightened awareness he'd developed during his wilderness days. A familiar bark drew their attention to the park's entrance. Scout bounded toward them, her golden fur gleaming in the morning sun, with Joe following at a more measured pace. His delivery route now regularly included stops in Boulder, and he'd become an integral part of what locals had started calling the Buddy System, a network of truckers who kept watch for lost pets along their routes. "There's my wilderness survivor," Joe greeted Buddy with a warm pat. "Got another success story for your mom, Emily. Remember that lost border collie from Wyoming? One of our drivers spotted her using your violin technique. Family's picking her up today." Emily beamed, automatically reaching for her phone to update the Facebook page that had evolved from Buddy's search into a nationwide lost pet resource. What had started as one girl's desperate attempt to find her dog had grown into something much larger, a movement that combined social media, community involvement, and the surprising power of music to bring lost pets home. The local shelter called yesterday, Emily shared as they walked together. They want Buddy to start visiting as a therapy dog. They think his story might help scared animals adjust, especially the ones who've been through trauma. Joe nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. He's got a way about him now, calm but alert. Scouts picked up a lot from him just in our visits." Indeed, the once bouncy puppy was walking more sedately beside Buddy, mimicking his watchful demeanor. During their stops in Boulder, Buddy had taken on the role of mentor, teaching Scout everything from basic commands to the subtle art of reading human emotions. They reached Emily's favorite spot in the park, a small hill overlooking the city. Here, just last week, she'd given her first violin performance since Buddy's return. The audience had been special. Families and their recently reunited pets, gathered to celebrate their own successful searches. "Mom says I'm different too," Emily confided to Joe as they watched Buddy and Scout explore the hillside. "More confident, more organized. The shelter even asked if I'd help coordinate their junior volunteer program." "Adventures have a way of changing us," Joe replied, unconsciously echoing Linda's words from weeks ago. "Sometimes getting lost is how we find out who we really are." A gust of wind carried the distant sound of orchestra practice from the high school, Bach's Minuet in G, of course. The piece had become something of an unofficial anthem for the Lost Pet Network. Buddy's ears pricked up at the familiar notes, and his howl joined the music, Scout's younger voice harmonizing enthusiastically. Later that afternoon, Emily sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, updating her journal. The simple diary she'd started during Buddy's absence had grown into a collection of stories, not just their own, but dozens of tales of lost pets and the communities that helped bring them home. Buddy dozed beside her, but his ears remained alert, tracking every sound from outside. Emily had learned to read his new signals. A lifted head meant someone walking past their house, a slight tail wag indicated a familiar car engine, and fully perked ears usually meant another dog needed help. "You're still my same buddy," she scratched his favorite spot behind his ears, just with some upgrades. He opened his eyes, one blue, one brown, and gazed at her with that mixture of devotion and wisdom that had become his hallmark since the journey. In some ways, their bond had grown stronger through the separation. Every shared moment now carried the weight of appreciation, of knowing exactly what they meant to each other. Outside, the setting sun painted Boulder's sky in shades of amber and rose, not unlike the sunrise that had witnessed their reunion. Emily could hear her mother preparing dinner downstairs, the evening news sharing another story about the growing success of the Buddy System network, and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway, each sound a reminder of how one dog's journey home had created ripples of change that continue to spread. Buddy's tail thumped against the floor as Emily picked up her violin. These evening practice sessions had taken on new meaning, no longer just about music, but about connection, about the invisible threads that tied their story to so many others. As she drew her bow across the strings, Buddy's gentle howl joined the melody, carrying with it echoes of wilderness nights and the unbending determination of a heart finding its way home. 1 year after Buddy's remarkable journey home, the Harper family returned to Pine Grove National Forest. The morning sun filtered through the canopy just as it had that fateful day, but this time, their visit was one of celebration rather than tragedy. Buddy sat calmly in the back seat beside Emily, his posture relaxed yet vigilant. The past year had softened some of his wilderness-earned edges while preserving the quiet wisdom he'd gained. His coat had regained its lustrous shine, though the small scars remained, silver badges of courage that told the story of his 1,000-mile journey. "Look familiar, boy?" Emily asked as they pulled into the parking area. Buddy's tail wagged steadily, his dual-colored eyes taking in the familiar landscape. But there was no fear in his demeanor now, no anxiety about being separated again. His bond with Emily had been tested by distance and strengthened by reunion. They weren't alone. Joe's blue Peterbilt was already parked in the lot, Scout bounding around his legs as he set up folding chairs. Behind him, a banner stretched between two trees read, "First Annual Buddy System Reunion Picnic." Cars were arriving steadily, carrying families and their pets, each with their own story of loss and reunion, each connected by the network that had grown from Buddy's story. "There's the guest of honor," called Ms. Rodriguez, who had expanded her coffee shop to include a lost pet information center, where community members could coordinate search efforts. She wasn't the only one whose life had changed because of Buddy's journey. Mr. Phillips had started a program teaching music students to help with audio searches, and Dr. Chen now specialized in rehabilitating recovered pets. Emily watched as Buddy made his rounds, greeting each family with the dignified grace he'd developed over the past year. At the shelter where he now worked as a therapy dog, they called him the ambassador, for his ability to calm traumatized animals and help them trust again. Every Wednesday, he and Emily visited newly arrived strays, his presence showing them that even the longest journey could end in happiness. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Joe remarked, joining Emily with Scout at his heels. His delivery route hadn't changed, but his truck now carried a special scanner that could detect pet microchips, and he'd helped coordinate a network of trucker volunteers who kept watch over America's highways. Scout's almost as big as Buddy now. The younger dog had indeed grown, though she still looked to Buddy with puppy-like admiration. Together, they had become a remarkable team during Joe's Boulder stops, helping to train other dogs in the skills they would need if they ever found themselves lost. Linda called everyone to attention as the picnic officially began. The gathering was more than just a celebration, it was also the launch of something new. Emily stepped forward, suddenly nervous despite all her public speaking experience over the past year. When Buddy found his way home, she began, her hand resting on his head, "We thought it was the end of our story. But it was really just the beginning. Today, we're officially launching the Buddy System Foundation, to help other families bring their pets home. The announcement was met with applause. The foundation would provide resources for pet searches, fund microchip scanners for truckers, and support shelters in rehabilitating found animals. But more than that, it would preserve the spirit of community that had helped bring Buddy home. As if on cue, the forest filled with music. Mr. Phillips had organized an ensemble of student musicians, and the familiar notes of Bach's Minuet in G floated through the trees. Buddy lifted his head and howled, his voice joined by Scout and dozens of other dogs, a chorus of the found, singing for those still searching. Emily unfolded the map she'd made of Buddy's journey, now laminated and marked with all the confirmed stops along his route. But alongside it, she placed a new map showing the spreading influence of the Buddy system, points of light spreading across the country, each representing a successful reunion. "You know what amazes me most?" she asked Buddy quietly as families shared their stories around the picnic tables. "How something that started with so much fear and sadness turned into so much hope and love." Buddy pressed against her leg, his expression seeming to say he'd known all along that he needed to get lost to help others find their way. His journey had transformed not just himself and Emily, but an entire community's understanding of what was possible when people came together. As the afternoon wound down, Emily took Buddy for a walk along the trail where they'd been separated a year ago. But this time, there was no fear in their steps, no storm on the horizon. Instead, there was understanding that sometimes the longest way home could become the path that helped others find their way. The setting sun painted the forest in shades of gold, much like the dawn that had witnessed their reunion. Emily pulled out her violin, she carried it everywhere now, ready to help with any search, and began to play. Buddy's howl joined her music, carrying through the trees not as a cry of longing, but as a song of triumph. They had come full circle, returning to where their story began. But like all true journeys, the end was really another beginning. Somewhere out there, another pet was lost, another family searching. And thanks to one remarkable Australian shepherd who refused to give up, they would have helped finding their way home. Buddy sat beside Emily as the last notes faded into the evening air, his pose a perfect blend of the family pet he'd always been and the wilderness survivor he'd become. In his dual-colored eyes was the quiet certainty that no matter how far apart they might be, love would always find a way to bridge the distance. The forest around them grew quiet, but the echo of their story continued to spread, carried on the winds of hope and the melodies of reunion, touching lives far beyond the 1,000 miles that had once separated them. For in the end, Buddy's journey had never really been about the distance traveled, but about the hearts changed and the lives connected along the way.